Okay, well, welcome to our afternoon session. My name is David Bates, and I'm the director of the Berkeley Center for New Media. And our center is, our own mission is really to bring together people working in technology, the arts, and the humanities and social sciences. So this is a great opportunity for the center to be involved in this conference. So thanks again to Andrew for having us participate. So I'm pleased to introduce our panelists for the panel today on global business and local strategies. We have a slight change in the lineup, so we're going to begin this panel with Mia Consalvo, who is currently a visiting professor at MIT in the Comparative Media Studies program there. But I just learned that she will be moving this summer to Concordia University in Montreal in a position in communication studies there. So Mia is best known, I think, for her book on cheating, gaming advantage in video games, which was published by MIT Press. And I also learned that she will be the next president of the Association of Internet. Oh, you are? Okay, so that obviously that particular site is outdated, so congratulations on the presidency. And so today, Mia Consalvo will be speaking on the strategies of Square Enix. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me all okay? This is actually a new project that I'm working on, part of a book that's looking at Japan's role in the game industry, and particularly Japan's games as they've traveled west. And so this actually, it arose out of one of the earlier pieces I was writing, but I'm especially interested in feedback, kind of because I'm still working with these ideas. And so just to give you a sense first of where this came from was some earlier work I did on Western otaku, which I'm guessing this crowd is very familiar with interest in Japanese popular culture being nothing new in the US and the West and elsewhere. I just like this photograph. But the Impressionists, for example, were very interested in Japan, its icons, its objects, its visual styles and tropes, and drew on this quite a bit in a lot of their paintings, in their posters. And so even if in current popular culture it may be seen as something more recent, it's really not. This is just a more recent manifestation. This is from an anime convention in Boston a couple of years ago, and some young cosplayers. And if you're wondering, it seems to be even growing in popularity. Let's see if this will work. I just found out about this literally 2 days ago. Tokyo Pop, which does a lot of brings a lot of the manga over to the West, actually has a series. There you go. So yes, it's not, as far as I know, being aired on any cable or broadcast station. Where'd you get the rest of it? But you can watch it on Hulu. The first episode just appeared there, and the conceit is that the creator or one of the leaders of Tokyo Pop has hired these 6 kind of cultural intermediaries for him, young people who are deeply into otaku culture, and they're going to scour America to find, not the next top model, but the next greatest otaku. And I also learned this on the site. If you're interested, just across the bay, the Best Western in Japantown is kind of reinvented itself as an otaku hotel with special touches, including places that come equipped with PlayStation 3, Wii, beanbag chairs, and the Japanese restaurant and bar. It's probably not a very, the otaku culture is not a large segment of society, but it's definitely a vital and very interesting one. And it was one that I was trying to investigate, especially we've seen a lot of attention to anime and manga and how those have fueled some young people's interests in Japan and Japanese culture. But I was especially interested in their video game use and, what worked there. And so I brought this lens of cosmopolitanism to helping understand what was going on. And if you've looked at this literature, it's been around for a while. It has many different flavors, different ways of interpreting it. Loosely, it's this idea of the world citizen. People have talked about it maybe not as an identity, but as a disposition. You can have expressed different facets or levels or degrees of cosmopolitanism. Some people have talked about banal as, very surface, non-reflective form. Henry Jenkins has mentioned the idea of pop cosmopolitan, so kind of the easy consumption of a lot of these Japanese images. Aesthetic, more of an interest in the art or the culture. And then, of course, the marketers talk about, what are people buying based on it. So in thinking through some of these categories, and I just mentioned some of these, the banal, is kind of at one end of this spectrum where there's not a lot of reflection. That's not necessarily bad, but we live in a culture where we have lots of influences from different regions, different nations. So, going out and obviously eating sushi is not a reflection of any deep interest in Japanese culture. Neither would be, following the Olympics, and this was the showdown between the Korean and the Japanese skater in the finals. It was kind of presented as, this cultural battle that was being waged. And the Olympics are a good example, just kind of overall. The release of the Final Fantasy games on the iPhone, again, buying these does not necessarily indicate any kind of deep interest. And when I talked with some of the players of these games, for some of them, there was kind of this surface. And for some of them, it stayed this way. For others, it was kind of an entry point. So this person, Jen, mentioned, anime was kind of her way in, and when she started, she didn't even realize, that this was Japanese. And eventually, she made the connection, and that kind of sparked her interest. But that's kind of one end of the spectrum. And as you move further along and people start engaging more deeply, or the people who do, they start thinking about what is it beyond this simple consumption or, surface image. And so Megan mentions the differences that she finds, that she interprets in Japanese video games. So like with the Pokemon games, she'd say, they always mention you have to believe in your heart. And she's like, I know of no American games that talk like this. And whether these things are objectively true or not is not what I'm interested in, but in how players themselves interpreted these things. A lot of them had really sort of higher expectations for Japanese video games, that the stories were necessarily deeper and more complex and more satisfying. And this person talks about, for example, Disney. They also often mentioned, like not being interested in like the Hollywood ending or the simplistic storylines. And that for whatever reason, the Japanese games had this deeper level to them. Kind of following further along after that deeper engagement, some of them talked about creating things on their own. And so Megan spent time in Japan, and she was also a big fan of Phoenix Wright, kind of an adventure game. And there's actually a musical based on this video game that runs in Tokyo. And she took the train there from Nagoya to see it. And she found out later it's on DVD, and she wants to create a fan translation for her friends. And likewise, other ways this is expressed are scanlations, so like strategy guides and novelizations of games and other things that aren't necessarily brought to Western audiences. Fans will take apart and then redo line by line. This is just one incredibly detailed version you can see here. And for a lot of these fans, it's especially important the fidelity of the translation, which can even come at the expense of making something flow more easily and taking liberties. They're really interested in the exact kind of word-for-word translation. And then likewise, it also moves into who are these other people who are producing this culture. And it can be, again, a little bit of the surface, all those all those crazy Japanese people, who just eat sushi and, walk around with swords. But for the deeply reflective ones who wanted to go to Japan and talk with people, they mentioned things like, I wanted to get out of the cities. I wanted to talk with regular people. Some of them also talked with Japanese students who were at their Western universities on their own study abroads to learn more about, everyday subjects and what mattered and that kind of thing. This extends online. This is just an academy, self-organizing academy on Square Enix of people who are trying to teach themselves Japanese. This was a common theme of a lot of these otaku, that they were interested in learning the language. Some of it was related to wanting to play games that had not been released in North America. Some of it was simply because they became interested in the language and in either wanting to visit Japan and wanting to be able to converse, or being drawn to the aesthetics of the culture and the language as part of that. And many of them either mentioned that they had been there or that they did have plans. Megan, who I've mentioned before, also has done study abroad, and she's done a couple of internships at Japanese companies as well. And in thinking about cosmopolitanism and how it's becoming broader, and I'm going to take it even more meta in a minute, I think that some of these virtual worlds can be places for cosmopolitan encounters, cultural clashes, as we've already heard. I'm more the optimist. I focus more on the positive things. There are definitely the negative side, as we've already heard about the Taiwanese surfers and the cold farmers. But they are these kind of synthetic places that are a mix of different cultures and different people. And I think that they are incredibly interesting to explore in this way. I'm just going to skip past this. So the otaku themselves, I think they fall along this spectrum of interests. And these games can give them an entry point into exploring difference. Some of it may be surface. For some of them, that maybe it's just an interest in something that seems foreign and exotic, but that for a significant number, it does mean something more, and it can be a catalyst for greater exploration. And so what are these games that they are playing and enjoying and are interested in? And there are quite a few. One of the names that kept coming up again and again was Square, or Square Enix, which is a Japanese developer and producer. They've created the Final Fantasy line. Some of the other things they've done, the partnership with Disney for Kingdom Hearts. They have this new game that's in beta, Wakfu. They have some smaller interests as well. They are not as diverse as some other Japanese companies that have extensive holdings in other leisure-based pursuits. But they do have manga. They do have their merchandise, of course. And they do have their global holdings. And I think that this is interesting to explore as well, and important because it shows how these companies are also struggling with encountering the other and with globalization and what that means. And so the question that sort of drove this new part is, who makes these products and how do we understand their role in this process? I don't know how well you can see that. This is the next few images, I think, are taken from the Square Enix annual report. So, of course, Square Enix is right in the center there with the star. But where Square kind of feels they're positioning themselves. And so you see other video game companies, Capcom, Ubisoft, Take-Two. You'll notice we mentioned Tencent yesterday. It's way up at the top there. So they've kind of grayed it out so you don't pay as much attention. But Square is definitely a major force in the game industry. And so I think that I'm not going to argue that it's particularly unique, but I think it does have, looking at it as an exemplar or a case study can give us some insights into how these companies are dealing with globalization and the changing marketplace. So looking at the rhetoric that they use and also their histories themselves as they try and keep relevant. And of course, Square Enix is a merger of two different companies. Actually, there are more in there now. But even looking at these two is instructive to see how globalization has impacted the game industry. So even though Enix is actually the older corporation, they were founded in 1975, And they have a series of very popular games in Japan, the Dragon Quest series, which they started releasing in 1987. Square was founded later in 1986, and then the next year launched the Final Fantasy series. And I'm not exactly sure which one has more in each series available. You know, they used to handily number them, but then they started doing like 10-2 and 7A, and they have mobile games. So counting them will be a project for another day. But they've each kind of made their name with these major lines of games. I think one thing that's telling is that Dragon Quest is the series, if you ask Japanese players, like what's their favorite RPG, Dragon Quest usually comes up as their favorite. And Final Fantasy does eventually appear in their list, but it is not the number one for them. Versus if you ask a lot of Western players, like these Western otaku, what's their favorite JRPG, Final Fantasy comes up. And Final Fantasy, as I'll show you in a moment, has definitely been more successful globally. Square has definitely been more aggressive of these two companies in pursuing a global marketplace. You can even just see here from this timeline, they registered as public companies within a few years of one another. By 1995, Square had established its LA subsidiary. In 1998, it had partnered with Electronic Arts to kind of co-publish games with one another. And it wasn't until 1999 that Enix Corporation actually had established a presence in America. And then you see here in 98, Square had gone over to Europe. In 2002, they were working with Walt Disney on the Kingdom Hearts collaboration, which has been successful enough. I just showed you a screenshot of the latest game in that series. And also Square has kind of led in terms of online interest. So it's one of the few examples actually of online games that are popular in Japan. In contrast with a place like Korea or even China, the market in Japan has largely been for console games, and mobile games have become increasingly popular, but MMOs have not been had the numbers like they do have in other Asian countries for whatever reason. But 2002, Square decided to take the Final Fantasy line, which had always been single-player games, and launch a multiplayer online version. It's particularly notable for a few reasons. First of all, it was playable on both the PlayStation 2 and the PC. It has since also expanded to the Xbox 360, and it's still up and running. And at its high, it claimed about 500,000 players, and I'm not sure how many still play. They still claim about that amount, but game companies are notorious for just, not releasing that data. The other interesting part of the story about Final Fantasy XI is that contrary to many MMOs which segregate people, as you've heard, by region or country, Square decided that players from multiple countries would play on the same servers. And so it was initially launched in Japan, and then the next year it came to North America, and then I think a year later to Europe. And people play from all of those regions on the same servers together. There's an auto-translate system. It's a little clunky, but it works. And it has led to some very interesting interactions between the players. I should also know, I'll get to that in a second. So in 2003, there was the merger of the companies. As I've mentioned, Square they get listed first. If you look at their annual reports, there's an honorary chairman who is not pictured, but his name is there. And if you look carefully at who owns a majority of stock in the company, it's this honorary chairman. He was the founder of Enix Corporation. He owns the majority of the company, but Square comes first. And I think it's a little reflective of this idea that to gain more global market share, Square kind of had the lead, in establishing those presences. So continuing on with this increasing intensification of globalization, in 2003, they did some work with Intel, optimizing graphics chips. They tied it to the Final Fantasy online game. In 2004, they had taken some of their games that were moving more deeply into other hardware systems like mobile phones. And then they started talking more with Western publishers in terms of how do you release games? They agreed with Sony Online Entertainment to publish EverQuest 2 in Japan. And I am not sure actually how well this is done. And then in 2005, Square Enix China in Beijing is established. In also that same year, Taito, which is an arcade company, you probably know them from Space Invaders. Square Enix acquired them. And this does not seem to be going as well as maybe some of their other developments. The arcade segment, which crashed early on in the States, used to be much more popular in Japan. It seems to be suffering in Japan right now as well. So Taito is currently taking a lot of losses. But they've also kind of diversified away from simply console entertainment-based games. They've done some things with social network sites. Actually, I haven't put here, but they've launched a division looking at serious games. They've created this Smile Lab for casual games. They've created a mobile studio. And so they're really kind of diversifying outwards. In 2009, one of the most interesting examples, they bought Eidos Limited, a UK-based company, best known for the Tomb Raider franchise. And they've also created Hitman. Eidos has studios in the US and Europe. And then in just this past year, they launched kind of the follow-up online game to Final Fantasy XI, Final Fantasy XIV. Has anyone here played 14? Yeah, okay. That's about the size of it. It has received universally negative reviews, and for good reason. It's very broken. It launched in North America, Europe, and Japan. And tellingly, this is a company that with 11 has never maintained official forums for its games. Players found other places. The developers were notoriously not interested in direct feedback about what was going on or what they would like to see. That doesn't mean they weren't paying attention, but they actively weren't acting like they were. And with Final Fantasy XIV and the almost universal negative outcry, they've taken some really unusual steps. A lot of the lead developers they announced to the player community have been sacked. They've been revising desperately the content, the UI system. I signed up for the game when it first opened in September or October, and usually they give you one free trial month. I still have not seen a charge on my credit card. They are continuing on the free period indefinitely, acknowledging that the players right now are perpetual beta players, if you want to talk about the labor of players. So that hopefully, if they do switch to a playing system, they will manage to keep some people. But even more critical, they announced at the end of 2010 that they had partnered with a Chinese company to release the game in China. As far as I know, it hasn't actually launched yet. But they do have plans for it there. And also in 2010, one of their European subsidiaries, Beautiful Game Studios, partnered with Shanda, the Chinese company, to co-develop a free-to-play online game called Championship Manager, which is a football management simulation game. So you can see kind of a growing element of interest in working with different partners, acquiring Western partners, finding new markets. And this is their term, polymorphic vision. I haven't heard anybody else use it, so this is definitely their own. But a good example is what they've done with Final Fantasy VII, which is one of the more popular of this series. And years after the release of Final Fantasy VII, which I think came out in 1997, they still kind of release content surrounding the fiction of that particular game. So there was a mobile game called Before Crisis, the DVD Advent Children. There was a PS2 game, Dirge of Cerberus. And so they're building mini franchises around pieces of the larger franchise itself. And I started thinking about what's going on here. And I mean, globalization, okay. It felt like that didn't take me very far in understanding what they were doing. And globalization or localization, again, didn't really get at it. And I started thinking about the Western fans and thinking about cosmopolitanism. And I was thinking about this term, corporate cosmopolitanism. Is this kind of a strategy or a way of understanding what these companies are doing? And it requires a little twist of the mind, because when you think of cosmopolitanism, at least as it's been theorized so far, it's like this world citizen. It's kind of like the spinach, like the happy version, we're all going to be wonderful and happy together. And you start applying that to corporations, and you're like, I don't know about that, right? And I mean, this is when you go to the Square Enix site, if you can read it here, this is the splash screen that comes up first. To spread happiness across the globe by providing unforgettable experiences. Now, I'm sure that, the CEO cannot go to the shareholders at the end of the quarter and say, we've spread 10% more happiness throughout the globe, and they're going to applaud him. They want to know what the revenue is. This is how they position themselves, but I think some of the concepts or the practices involved with cosmopolitanism can help us drill down a little bit to understand what these companies are trying to do. So it was kind of a thought exercise. I took some of the precepts of what a cosmopolitan disposition entails and looked at what Square Enix was doing to see how it fit. So for example, and this is Yuri's conception, he mentions the ability to travel as being an important element of being cosmopolitan or having a cosmopolitan disposition. So these companies, for example, Square Enix has offices in Japan, as you know, and North America, Europe, and China. There's also kind of this virtual travel that they've built into their online games. And they draw from the cultures and interests of those areas so that the games themselves as products are actually able to travel around the globe. Yuri also mentions, as part of cosmopolitanism, the ability to consume many places and environments. And first of all, I think it's very interesting the use of the term consume as being part of a cosmopolitan disposition. But in terms of companies, that might actually fit pretty well. In setting up those companies or those offices around the world, they are using the labor in these various markets, right? They are drawing on the bodies that are there to create these games, to produce value for them. And part of their strategy in doing that is acknowledging, we may not know what the local tastes are, or we think we don't, and that somehow you, local people, have, the on-the-ground knowledge. You have the understanding. But that, this is a strategy that more of these companies, particularly Japanese companies, actually most game companies, are employing. So they're setting up satellite offices with local workers to create either, to determine what's going to travel well, how it might be localized for a particular audience, or increasingly working with this broader IP like Final Fantasy and saying, what could we create here that's related within the Final Fantasy franchise for this particular space, for Northern Europe or maybe for South America. And so giving them more freedom to determine those pieces. And likewise, it may be the case increasingly that they're purchasing these companies. So rather than simply setting up offices, taking something like IDOS and saying, this is part of our product lineup now. Microsoft is also very good at this. This, as I mentioned, is not something that Square does by itself. A lot of Japanese companies have tried this approach. Capcom, in particular, has done this a lot, taking their IPs and basically giving the IP to a Western company. There's a large sense in the game industry in Japan, I'll probably come back to this at the end, but that there are problems with the game industry in Japan, that things are stagnating, games aren't selling as well. The Japanese market itself is shrinking for whatever reasons, whether it's demographics or whatever, and that the larger market growth, as we saw yesterday, is coming from the rest of the world, and that for whatever reason, Japanese games don't sell outside of Japan as well as they used to. And so one way to counteract this is to buy companies that are Western and create their own games to increase the revenue stream, or to set up offices with local people who can do this as well. And so take your game, give it a Western flavor, which makes interesting assumptions about what a Japanese game is that wouldn't travel well? What are the assumptions we're making about the Japaneseness of the games? Another element of cosmopolitanism is the willingness to take risks by virtue of encountering the other. And in the game industry, there are certainly game companies that can get by with selling a few thousand copies, and that's, how they can get by. But for people who are used to creating AAA titles, the cost of creating these games just goes up and up and up. You're talking about 60, 70, $100 million to create some of these games. With each iteration of the console hardware, it becomes more expensive. Interestingly, we're seeing a slowdown in console generation release. And so the 360 and the PS3 are aging, but we haven't seen any rapid deployment of new consoles. And this is probably to the benefit of the software producers who just simply cannot deal with the next scale. But you'll notice here, again, this is from the Square annual report, the sales of their main titles by region. You can see for Final Fantasy, the green is Japan, yellow is North America, and the blue is Europe. And then there's a little tiny slice of gray that is Asia, which is usually China. Dragon Quest, as I mentioned before, typically does well in Japan and not in the rest of the world. You can easily see that here. And then Batman Arkham Asylum, I mentioned the buying of the Western firms with the Western titles to bolster the bottom line, obviously doing much better in Europe and North America compared to Japan. However, this is where kind of the cynical part comes in. This openness to other people's cultures, languages, has limits in terms of corporations and what they want to achieve. So for example, I mentioned 11 had this opportunity for players from different countries to play together on the same servers. And with 14, it was an open question for a while about whether they were going to continue that. And they have, but only for North Americans, Europeans. Chinese players get to play the game, but only on their own segregated servers. And they, of course, had to partner with a Chinese company to get the game in. And there's interestingly been a lot of controversy in the player community, not just because the game is supposedly bad, but they made some interesting changes to the game that the players feel they have not adequately explained. For example, the chocobo, which is this bird-like creature that appears in all the Final Fantasy games. In the online versions, it's a mount that you can ride. And I believe it's in the Japanese version, they've always used the katakana for chocobo to represent it. And in Final Fantasy XIV, it suddenly appeared a kanji for chocobo. Now, there's no kanji for chocobo, as far as I know. And they had put two together, and the literal translation was horsebird. And the Japanese players were like, wait a minute, what's going on? Why do we suddenly have horsebirds to ride instead of chocobos? And the supposition is they were creating this game in part for the Chinese market, and so they had created this version without the katakana and then just sloppily not change things for the Japanese version. I cannot confirm or deny, but it's also causing tensions within the other communities, like the Japanese saying, wait a minute, isn't this a game for us? Kind of going back to those tensions about us versus them. Even in this case, if they can't actually play together. So thinking again about that spectrum, I think that the spectrum itself can be an interesting way to think about corporations and how they are dealing with globalization, especially in the game industry. As I've mentioned, in the early days of the industry, a lot of these Japanese companies almost had no competition or very limited competition. They enjoyed global sales almost without trying. If you look at top 100 lists of all-time favorite video games, usually the majority of them are Japanese. But increasingly, as you look at top-selling lists across different regions, it's a much more diversified set in places like North America and Europe. You see a lot more competition from Western game companies. Japan is different. It's much more closed. When I was there in 2005 for a stay, it took me a while before I actually even realized I would go to the game stores to see what was on the shelves, that I wasn't even seeing any Western games. on the shelves. It was all Japanese games. And I bought the magazines even though I couldn't read Japanese, and it was like the stray ad for a Western game. They've enjoyed kind of a lock on that local market. But as I mentioned, that local market is shrinking. And so the global, which they used to just sort of take for granted, has been steadily eroding. And now they're kind of desperately trying to figure out how to switch that through these various structures. One thing I didn't mention, I had to write this down because it was one of the best examples of corporate speak I've ever seen. They're trying to react in different ways, trying things that they've never tried before. So Square said in their annual report, "We conducted a headcount adjustment to strengthen our fundamentals and energize the organization." A headcount adjustment. This means that the headcount was reduced. There was a reduction of over 800 employees. They actually hired 350 people, but they let off a bunch more. And so there was a net decline in 457 employees. Interestingly, I mean, the culture of like the lifetime employment in Japan is obviously disappearing. Companies like this, I've never seen anything like this in any of their earlier reports. And the way that they're couching these phrases, I think, is telling. But they're really trying to, strategize how best to do it. I think that a company like Square actually has gotten more reflective and engaged in terms of their strategies. There are other companies that simply take the view of, this is what we'll send if you don't like it. We don't care. But it's a way of understanding them beyond simply, what they're selling and not selling. And also going beyond my initial conceptions of localization. It's an important component, which I haven't mentioned here, but localization doesn't tell the whole story of what companies are doing. And actually, Square has been really good in terms of its history of localization of titles, which has served them well, but it just shows that localization is not something that will solve the entire picture. So these are my drafty conclusions, and this is just somebody dressing up their dog as Okami, which is my favorite video game of all time. So I think that Square is just one example of a corporation developing its cosmopolitan disposition. And I think it just shows, the dynamics of the global game industry and how much these companies are struggling to deal with these global marketplaces. And it doesn't mean that cosmopolitanism is something that's going to make everything happy and wonderful, but that as we increasingly come to see corporations as individuals and as actors on the world stage, that we can use these frameworks to understand their actions as well in ways that are beneficial to us as well as perhaps not so beneficial. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
While we're setting up here, I'll introduce our next speaker. Thank you, Mia. Mr. Yongjae Min is a pioneer and veteran of online games with over 12 years of experience in the digital media industry. He's been the Chief Business Operations Officer at Nexon for the last 7 years, overlooking marketing, publishing, licensing, and business development and public relations. Mr. Min was at the forefront in pioneering various business models in the online gaming space, such as microtransactions, in-game ads, PC cafe commercialization, and the first online game-based TV animation series. Before joining Nexon, Mr. Min was the Chief Operating Officer at CCR and helped its game Fortress become the first big hit casual game in Korea and the first to be called a national game. Mr. Min has been lecturing on online games and digital media at Seoul National University for the last 4 years. His class is the first full course class on online games at a major university in Korea. Most recently, he has formed a new game studio and is currently working on producing the next generation of online contents. So please join us in welcoming Mr. Min.
Thank you. I'm really honored to have a chance to share my experience with you. So I promise two things. One thing is I will do my best to deliver the real live experience information. And second thing is I'll make you happy by using broken English. So sometimes I use Korean. I don't know about that. Amy will help me. Amy now work at Nexon America in corporate planning division, and she graduated from Berkeley too. So yeah. Okay. Let's just see several clips before we begin. This is MapleStory. This is Nexon's online game. It's very cute character and casual MMORPG. Visual Studio made this game 2002, and we acquired that studio 2005, and it has been serviced until now. This game is very cute. So in Korea, the target user are elementary school students and early middle school students. But it's same game, but it is a little bit different effect to every country. First, America. This is American TV commercial.
Yeah, so?
What's up with that?
Because wearing a gentleman's hat is free.
That's just like MapleStory. Free online game, we get to hang out with friends and experience the out of the ordinary.
That's right.
Role playing at MapleStory.com. Free. Free. 10 points. 10 and up.
Okay, next one.
What's with the snails, bro?
They help me relax.
Relax?
That's right. Relax. You know what else? They're free.
That's just like MapleStory. Free online game where you get to hang out with friends and experience the out of the ordinary.
Exactly. Come join us at MapleStory.com for we're ready to eat it for you. Just hand it up.
What's that feel like?
And this is the TV commercial in Japan of the same game.
いらっしゃいませ。何名様ですか？すみません。待ち合わせしてるんですけど。あ、ごめん遅くなって。
俺らも今来たとこ。
今日はどこ行く？
お尻の方は
あそこ適当強いんだよ。
フォローするって。
ご注文は？
これ行けば。
パソコンでみんなと気軽にアドベンチャー。無料オンライン RPG。メイプルストーリー。じゃあ行こっか。オンラインゲームはネクト。
Okay, now we start to see Korean CF of MapleStory. As I mentioned, in Korea, MapleStory is the game for elementary school students, so you have to remember when you see those TV commercials. And the other ones. And the last one. Is there anyone who knows these girls? Very famous idol group, Girls' Generation. They are very famous in Asia. So what do you think about those TV commercial? Do you know what I want to say? The differentiation is like that. In the States or in Japan, online game is not yet the major contents of culture. So this TV commercial try to deliver some message. In the States, free to play online game, and in Japan, if you want to meet friends and hang out together, you can do that through this game. But Korean TV commercial, there's no message. Just we try to deliver our image. It is cool. It is cool and beautiful girls, and just some like Sailor Moons, very famous Korean pop singers. So that's enough, because in Korea, a lot of people know about the game and the function, and the, so we don't need to deliver a special message. Of course, there are some TV commercial to try to deliver some message in Korea, but I want to let you know about the differentiation of online games between Korean and the other countries. So today I want to talk about Korean online game and its history and its characteristic, and many innovations that we tried in Korean market. Yeah, I was typical Korean. I've worked in online game industry for the past 12 years. I think I'm the only man who came from Asia for this conference. So my English is not good, so I feel very uncomfortable. So maybe I will use Korean. And first, Korean online game industry overview. Korean online game industry is US dollar is 2011 about 9 billion. So last year 7.5 billion US market, US dollar, billion US dollar. In Korean market is relatively mature than the other Asian market, but almost all major Korean online game companies make their revenue almost 50% or 60% from overseas. So China market and the other Southeast market has growing so fast. Korean online game industry grow together. And this is Korean online Korean game industry overview. As you may know, online game, the portion of online game is very high. The other console and mobile and arcade game, of course, Korean like to play, but absolutely high portion of online game. And about world, Korean online game is about 24.7 point of world online market. There are several key players in Korea: Nexon and NCSoft, HanGame. HanGame is a part of NHN. NHN, the meaning is Neighbor HanGame Network. It means Neighbor is the most famous search engine in Korea, and HanGame is the game portal. and the other is NeoWiz, CJ Internet, and so on. Briefly, Nexon is one of the biggest online game company, and we developed the world's first graphic-based online game, The Kingdom of the Wind, 1996, and we developed many games and published many games. Nexon is still private, but financial guy estimate the value is about 10 billion, more or less. And NCSoft is a traditional MMORPG developer, Lineage 1 and Lineage 2, and Ion and Guild War. And the value is more or less $5 billion US. NHN is search engine and internet portal, and it expanded to game sector. Its value is 10 billion more or less. Korean online game industry is a very unique, several features, advanced IT infrastructure, and internet user is the penetration rate is world number 1. High-speed internet we can use, we can access everywhere, and 6 out of 10 people play games daily for more than 1 hour. So Korea is not a big country, and our population is less than 50 million, more or less. But every year almost 500 new game are coming out. So online game market is very hot, and there are a lot of Esports Pro League, and it is not unique features. About 10 and 12 years ago, esports is everybody was frightened by seeing those leagues, but nowadays it's common things. 24 hours game broadcasting channels, and not just StarCraft and Warcraft and Cut Rider and Counter-Strike. A lot of many games have their own leagues. And this is about Asian online game overview. In China, this data is last December. The yellow one is Korean online game. Number 1 and number 3 is Crossfire, is FPS that was made by Smilegate. And Dungeon & Fighters, that was made by Neopool. Nexon acquired Neopool about 3 years ago. And Dragon Nest is a Korean game too. And Taiwan is number 2, number 3, and from number 5 to 10 are Korean game. It's about only online game sectors, not total game. And Japan is number 1 and 2, and except number 3, and all about Korean game. And Thailand is total game are Korean online game. So let's look at about Korean online game history. Can you understand what I want to say? Thank you. The more boring you get, the more clips you shall be watching. This is first graphic-based online game, The Kingdom of the Wind. Nexon made this game about 16 years ago, but the most important thing is not just this game is the first graphic-based online game, but just it has been serviced nowadays. It is still serviced because, as you may know, online game is not a product, it's something like a service. So it is very similar to TV series. So movie is just one time. So but every week we will see the new TV series. It's exactly same. The Kingdom of the Wind, the origin we made that 16 or 17 years ago, but we upgraded every content every day, every month. So now nowadays elementary, first, two, and second and third grade, almost all elementary school students in Korea use this game. And this is a first big hit casual online game, Fortress. It's a very simple game. The users just to control the angle and power. So it's something like Canon. I made this game 1999. It's very interesting is when I came to States, I was always surprised because I think American people have very good ability to make a new naming and trend and lead the trend, because this game is something like a social game. It is a very simple mechanism and plus very strong social community service, so we can chat each other and make friends, and the user can build their own community. So at the time, I want to make the game not for hardcore gamer, but for internet user. So 2000 in Korea, this game hits very mega hits, and it was the first game that beat 100,000 concurrent users, and its registered user is almost about 50% of Korean population. So the professor introduced me as an expert of online game, and I made a several business models. Yes, at the time, I have to survive. We have a lot of registered users, and we have a lot of traffic and user experience, but there is no business model to make money. So in order to survive and in order to give salary to our employees, I have to make many business models, and by using that, we made a lot of monies too. Yeah. It is first PC Cafe commercialized model, and this is Quiz. This is the first game that use the microtransactions. I will talk about a little bit in the later, but in Korea there are a lot of PC Cafe. So this model is the private users can play free in their home, but the PC Cafe, if they want to play our game, they have to pay to our company. And 2001, in Quiz we tried to try item selling business. At the time, nobody knows this revenue model became industry norm. Many people laugh at us. Your game was not good, so because of that reason, you cannot do subscription fee. Yes, partly that is true, but the nature of the game is different, because the hardcore game is for hardcore game user, but this game is not for game user, it's internet user. So we tested several users and we asked them, are you think you are a game user? But about 60% of our casual user said, no, I'm not a game user. I'm just internet user. I just like this content, not just game, but this is content or chatting system or community service. So we have to think. We have to think the character of the game before we made the business model or revenue model. In Korea, internet cafes, there are a lot of internet cafe, and it is almost the same in China and Taiwan and the other Southeast country. It's around 20,000. And then many RPGs, and then MapleStory, and Cartrider. It is second big hit casual game. The casual game is very important. The reason is MMORPG is something like for real game user. So the user is cannibalized between PC game user and console game user and MMORPG user. But this kind of casual game user is new one. It is something like social game user. So let's just see the clips. This game was very popular in 2004 in Korea and 2005 and 2006 in China and Taiwan. And many genres are coming. So this is one of the clips, and we made a Counter-Strike for online version. As you may know, every developer and publisher trying to localize their game to the local market, because online game is a very good content for localizing, because it is product. It is not product, it's a service. So we can upgrade every month and every quarter, so we can change the content very often. So the Counter-Strike's but Counter-Strike's the game quality is very good, but about FPS genre, the character of FPS genre is the first mover advantage is very, very high. So it's very interesting is first FPS game in some country, they get a lot of advantages. So in Korea, Southern Attack is the most popular FPS, but in China, Crossfire is most popular game, and in Thailand and the other country is Point Blank and the other games. The quality of the game is almost same, but 먼저 들어간 게임의 그런 익숙해진 유저가 잘 바꾸질 않기 때문에 그 한국에서는 좀 망한 게임인데 그 게임이 해외로 갔을 때 먼저 가서 잘 되는 경우가 상당히 많습니다.
Right. So with FPS in general, whoever enters the market first has a competitive edge, and it's hard for the user to change to another FPS. So that's an important feature or important factor.
That's exactly what I want to say. And nowadays there are a lot of genre conversions and so on. And we have to know why Korean online game is so popular and is competitive. So this is just one slide and very important. So I will use Korean. 네, 한국의 그 온라인 게임이 강한 거는 몇 가지 이유를 들 수 있습니다.
I can give you a couple reasons why the strengths of Korean online games.
네, 뭐 간단하게 여기 몇 가지를 나열했는데 여기에 대한 내용을 조금 더 상세하게 설명을 드리겠습니다.
Okay, I'll explain in more detail the couple factors listed here.
일단 나라는 작은데 많은 인구가 모여 있습니다.
It's a small country but very densely populated.
남한 면적을 예로 들면은 제가 정확히 모르지만 캘리포니아의 1/6 or 1/7 정도 될 것 같습니다.
Just taking South Korea
I'm
alone,
not sure, but
he thinks that it's about 1/6 of California.
네, 거기에 한 5천만 명이 모여 있습니다.
And there's about 50 million people in South Korea alone.
그리고 한국은 민족이 하나의 민족으로 구성되어 있기 때문에 다양성을 추구하기보다는 어떤 유행이 번졌을 때 혼자 안 하면은 좀 이상하게 보는 성향이 있어서 한번 유행이 불면은 그걸 모두 다 따라해야 되는 빨리 번지는 성향을 가지고 있습니다.
Right, and because Korea has a homogeneous population, there's a tendency for people to prefer not so much diversity as to follow trends. And it's considered if you don't, once a trend spreads, it's to a point where people might feel left out if they don't follow the trend.
모든 일은 굿띵 앤 배드띵을 가지고 있는데 이러다 보니까 유행이 한 번에 빨리빨리 변하는 좋은 점을 가지고 있습니다.
Suppose the pros would be that the trends would change rapidly.
그리고 세 번째 뭐 IT 강국이다라는 진부한 얘기 살짝 하고요.
And of course, Korea has a strong IT infrastructure.
그리고 잘 아시는지 모르겠지만 한국이 온라인 게임만 강한 게 아니라 아시아에서는 한국에 있는 싱어나 뭐 무비스타나 TV 시리즈가 아시아 전역에 매우 인기를 끌고 있습니다.
Right, and not just IT alone, but or online games alone, but there's a Korean waves such as Korean singers, Korean pop culture, which is all gaining a lot of popularity and actually is very popular in Asia right now.
왜 그러냐에 대해서 여러 가지 설명이 있는데 사실 저도 정확히는 잘 모르겠고요.
There's a lot of theories about why there's this popularity right now. I don't know personally myself what the exact reason is.
뭐 굳이 약간 거짓말을 보태서 찾자면은 한국 자체가 인구가 많이 똑같은 사람이 모여 있고 또 남북에 갈라져 있고 상당히 상황이 드라마틱하다 보니까 그렇지 않나 이렇게 생각을 합니다.
But I think if I were to exaggerate a little bit, it might be because
Why? Go ahead.
Because we're a divided nation, North and South Korea, and was there one more factor you wanted to say?
그리고 보면은 한국은 또 이렇다는 얘기도 듣고 있습니다. 한국이 반도 국가이기 때문에 유럽에서 이탈리아 사람들이랑 좀 기질이 비슷하다고도 하고요.
And also because Korea, just like Italy, it's a peninsula.
그리고 한국에 있는 모든 남자들은 군대를 갔다 와야 해야 되고 정말 그 분단 국가에 산다는 게 그냥 여러분 생각하는 것보다는 상당히 삶을 하루하루를 소중하고 드라마틱하게 만들기 때문에 뭐 그런 스트레스가 조금 경쟁적이고 이런 창의적인 콘텐츠를 만들게 하는 요소가 아닌가 생각을 합니다.
So I suppose people might become a little competitive because perhaps the Korean men, for instance, have to serve in the military. So that makes every day more valuable, and therefore they would compete and live out their lives to the fullest to maximize.
It's really, really important. I feel very comfortable and I want to live in California because when I came to California, the air is different, and I don't try to survive because a lot of land and a lot of resources and a lot of food. So I can live in here, relatively small effort and good life. But in Korea, if I want to live a little bit same standard, I have to more energy. Anyway, but the last one is Korean government support. But the most important is 여기 보이는 것처럼 그냥 정부가 잘한 것보다는 여러분들이 모르는 재미나는 게 하나 더 있습니다.
So of course there is a government support, but there is actually one more factor.
여러분도 잘 아시다시피 그 온라인 게임 같은 경우에는 IT랑 엔터테인먼트가 섞여 있기 때문에 상당히 똑똑한 고급 인력들이 많이 올수록 산업이 발전을 합니다.
So because this is a combination of IT and entertainment, the online game industry, the more elite the workforce is, the more it'll prosper and become fostered.
제가 게임 인더스트리에 있는 여러 나라 분들을 만나면서 느끼는 게 한국에 있는 게임 인더스트리에 특히 온라인 게임 인더스트리에 있는 사람들 중에 상당히 고학력자들이 많다는 점입니다.
So I've been to different countries and have met up with a lot of people in the industry, in the online game industry, and what I have felt is that in Korea we do have a very highly educated workforce in the online game industry.
정부에서 이런 온라인 게임을 비롯한 IT 기업에서 근무를 3년 정도 할 경우에 군대를 면제해주는 그런 제도를 지난 10년간 사용을 해서 고학력의 서울대나 뭐 카이스트나 이런 똑똑한 학생들이 온라인 게임 인더스트리로 많이 유입된 게 실질적인 한국에서 온라인 게임이 발전한 요인이 아닌가 생각을 합니다.
Right. In fact, the reason why there is this concentration of highly educated work or people in the industry, in the online game industry, is partly due to the Korean government giving military service exemptions to men who will work for certain sectors, including IT and online games. So that has led to an increase in the quality of the workforce.
넥슨 아까 언급한 넥슨, NC 소프트, 그리고 NHN 같은 모든 회사들이 실제 많은 만약에 이 회사가 작았을 때 채용하기 어려운 고급 인력들을 이런 병역 특례 제도를 통해서 뭐 바람의 나라랑 리니지나 모든 게임들이 나오는데 큰 기여를 했습니다.
And in fact, this exemption that has been sanctioned and carried out in full force for the last 10 years by the Korean government has directly led to this increase in the quality of the workforce being upgraded. And in fact, these companies that started out pretty small, NCSoft, NHN, and Nexon, would not have had the ability to acquire this elite group of workforce had it not been for this type of government policy.
그러면 지금부터는 그 한국 온라인 게임에서 적용된 이노베이션들을 좀 풍부한 사진과 예를 보면서 살펴보도록 하겠습니다.
So now I'll be going over the lot of innovative models that have been tested out successfully in Korea, one by one, and show you the examples.
너무 진부한 얘기인데 2001년 이후로 한국에서는 마이크로 트랜잭션 모델이 아예 정착을 했죠. 이제는 전 세계적으로 다 하는 인더스트리 놈이 되었습니다.
Right. Since 2001 in Korea, the virtual item selling microtransactional business model has become industry standard in Korea.
제가 그분이 어떤 분인지 기억을 아직도 하고 있는데요. 2004년, 2005년도에 제가 GDC랑 E3 갔을 때 이런 얘기를 했는데 이제 미국의 어떤 분이 그 한국은 돈을 잘 못 내서 이렇지 이런 게 미국에선 통하지 않는다고 했는데 현재 많이 되고 있네요.
Right. In 2004-2005, when I was visiting the States for GDC and E3, there was one gentleman that I can't really quite remember, but he was saying that this model wouldn't fly in America, but in fact it's doing quite well now.
네, 그분 아주 지금 유명한 분이신데 이름을 좀 말할 수는 없을 것 같습니다.
So he's actually quite well known, but I'm not sure if I could mention his name.
네, 미국이랑은 좀 다른 거지만 PC 카페 커머셜리제이션이 2001년 1월에 한국에서 처음에 시도가 됐었죠.
So this is not something that exists in America, but in Korea we commercialized a PC cafe. We launched this business model back in 2001 January.
네, 이거 할 때 그 PC방 협회 분들이 저희 회사에 와서 데모도 많이 하셨고요. 제 이름 적혀 있는 인형 들고 막 화형식도 하고 많이 그랬습니다.
So in fact, this became a big issue in Korea, and a lot of there was a mass demonstration by PC cafe owners who demonstrated right outside of Nexon with the voodoo dolls, burning the doll, and the doll represented, of course, Mr. Min.
제가 그래서 몇 년 동안에 PC방 갈 때는 모자를 쓰고 다녔고요.
So for the last couple of years after that, I went to PC cafes with mandatory wearing of the hat.
하지만 지금은 뭐 한국에 있는 모든 게임 회사들이 다 쓰는 일반적인 래핑 모델이 되었고 한국 외에도 이제 동남아시아, 대만, 중국으로 이 모델이 계속 뻗어나가고 있습니다.
Right. So after the dramatic implementation, it's now become quite standard, this business model, in the rest of East Asia and Taiwan and China as well.
네, 이거는 게임 안에 적용된 인게임 애드의 모양인데요. 뭐 새롭다는 것보다는 이거는 제가 2004년에 적용했던 모델입니다.
So this is an example of the in-game advertisement that I have tried out in 2004.
제가 강조하고 싶은 거는 이런 게 뭐 한 번, 두 번 정도 이렇게 이벤트성으로 적용되는 게 아니라 이미 8, 9년 전에 적용이 된 다음에 지금은 너무도 TV 커머셜처럼 되는 것처럼 자연스럽게 한국에는 정착을 했다는 것을 말해드리고 싶습니다.
What I want to emphasize is that since this was sort of tried out initially around 8 to 9 years ago, now it has sort of become settled almost like a TV commercial, as a TV commercial would be. This type of in-game advertisement, it's become quite standard.
네, 또 클립을 보는 시간이 왔죠?
Here we go with another clip.
이거는 2004. I made this project with Coca-Cola, so it is very easy to look around, but it is more complicated than you think because just to CF and just to commercial or just to the other product's logo is on the game. The user doesn't like to play, so we have to discuss with the developers and planner and the promotion marketer. So 그 정확한 접점을 게임을 이해하고 그 게임 안에 녹여낼 수 있는 점을 찾아야 됩니다.
Right. So the biggest, the most important thing when you're trying to implement an in-game advertisement is that you understand exactly what the game is like in order to execute this. What kind of execution you want to do for the in-game advertisement, meaning what kind of advertisement would be most proper for this type of game.
예를 들어 이거 같은 경우에는 이 코카콜라 맵에서 강제로 하는 게 아니라 여러 맵 중에서 이 코카콜라 맵을 유저가 선택을 할 수가 있고요. 유저가 강제로 이 맵에서 하는 게 아니라 유저들이 여러 맵 중에서 이 코카콜라 맵을 선택할 수가 있고요.
So right now, for instance, it's not like the users are forced to play this Coca-Cola map, but the user has the option of choosing this map to play.
대신 이 맵에서 플레이를 했을 때 저희가 혜택을 줍니다.
However, if the user does choose to play in this map, user will receive certain benefits or gifts.
그리고 이 뒤에 있는 이 콜라 풍선 같은 거를 달고 있는데 이거를 사용할 때도 아주 사소한 베네핏을 유저한테 줍니다.
Right. So for example, that little can over there hanging right around the car, if the user does choose to have that be attached to the car, then the user will receive certain small benefit.
네, 좀 더 그런 게임 펑션과 광고가 결합된 예를 조금 더 세부적으로 보여드리겠습니다.
Right. So another example where the nature of the game and the function of the item that's being used for the in-game advertisement.
네, 이거는 저희가 2005년, 2006년에 BMW 미니랑 현대 자동차와 했던 프로모션인데요.
This is a co-promotion that we did back in 2005 with Hyundai and BMW.
이 같은 경우는 여러분이 보실 때 전혀 TV 커머셜이라고 생각을 그 게임 안에 있는 광고라고 생각을 할 수 없습니다.
You wouldn't think that this was actually an in-game advertisement.
왜냐하면 지금 이 BMW 미니인데 BMW 미니에서 강조하고 싶은 기능이 있습니다. 뭐 속도가 좋다거나 자기네들은 코너링이 좋다거나 이때 저희가 BMW랑 얘기했을 때는 BMW는 크기는 작지만 코너링, 드라이빙의 감각이 좋은 차라는 거를 어필하고 싶어 했었습니다.
So when we were working with BMW wanted to emphasize a couple of factors through this ad. They wanted to emphasize speed and also cornering despite the small size of the vehicle.
여기서부터 가장 중요한 아트가 나오는데요.
So the most important part of the art.
자연스럽게 이 BMW를 그 스키만 바꾸는 게 아니라 미묘하게 코너링이 좋은 그런 기능을 넣어서 유저가 플레이를 하면서 자기도 모르게 BMW는 코너링이 좋은 카다라는 것을 인식하도록 만듭니다.
So in fact, what we would do is something very subtle. So for users who choose to drive the Mini, we made it so that the car drives with a slightly better cornering, so that the user doesn't really realize this directly, but the user will feel it as the user plays.
여기서 그걸 어느 정도 하느냐, 너무 강하게 넣었을 경우에는 이 BMW 미니를 사용하지 않는 다른 유저가 이건 게임이 공정하지 못하다고 불만하고 게임을 떠나고요. 너무 미묘하게 넣었을 경우에는 BMW를 사용하는 유저가 별로 혜택이 없다고 느끼기 때문에 그 적절한 밸런스를 찾는 게 노하우입니다.
So it's a very tricky thing. It's a tricky balance that we have to maintain. If we do it so that the cornering advantage is too obvious, and the other users who don't use a Mini will feel disadvantaged. But if you make the benefit a little too subtle, meaning the cornering benefit too subtle, then the user will feel no incentive to use a vehicle. So it's a tricky balance you have to maintain.
그리고 여기서 또 재밌는 점이 발상의 전환을 해야 됩니다. 생각의 전환이 필요합니다.
So we need a change in how we think.
이걸 처음에 할 때 BMW 미니 측에서는 자기네 자동차를 사용을 하려면 저희 보러 돈을 내라고 했습니다.
Initially, when we were talking with BMW, they wanted us to pay for using their vehicles in the game.
하지만 저희는 너희 거를 공짜로 광고해 주는데 너희가 돈을 내야 된다고 이야기를 했습니다.
But we told them, no, it's the other way around. In fact, you have to pay us since we're advertising your vehicle.
그래서 적정한 합의점을 찾은 게 그래 우리는 너희 자동차나 이런 모든 카피라이트를 그냥 우리가 알아서 써서 공짜로 광고를 해주고 너희는 그냥 자동차를 경품으로 몇 대 걸어라.
So we came to a compromise. We decided to be able to use these vehicles in the game for free and use their copyright. And in fact, they would put up a couple of cars for events in real life.
그리고 우리가 게임상에서 이 BMW를 어떻게 사용하든지에 대해서 터치를 하지 말아라.
And also another condition was that BMW wouldn't meddle with how we were going to use these vehicles in the game.
그래서 보면 여기 여러 자동차들이 있는데요. 저희가 이 자동차들을 게임 안에서 한 7, 8달러, 뭐 9달러 정도의 돈을 받고 팔았습니다.
So you'll see a couple models of the vehicles, and we sold each vehicle for about $7 to $8 in the game.
여러분도 아시겠지만 이런 온라인 아이템은 원가가 없죠. 저희가 이게 한 뭐 3, 40만 대 정도씩 팔렸으니까 이런 새로운 차를 출시할 때마다 뭐 한 40억, 50억씩 벌었죠. 3, 40억씩 다.
So as you guys know, there is no set price really for virtual items and online. So we sold about perhaps 30, 40.
뭐 그거는 뭐 차의 인기에 따라서 많이 다르니까 편안하게 30억에서 50억 뭐.
$3 to $5 million.
그럴 경우에 막상 돈을 벌고 나니까 이 자동차 회사들에서는 그거 우리랑 나눠야 되는데? 라는 생각이 생기죠.
Right, and then obviously the next step would be that the BMW would think, you guys made a lot of money, and I think it's best that we split it.
하지만 저희는 나눠줄 필요가 없는 게 뭐 광고 효과를 많이 해줬고 더 좋은 거는 이렇게 저희가 유료로 팔아야지만 즐기는 유저들이 저거를 돈을 내고 페이해서까지 산다는 얘기는 그만큼 그 브랜드에 대한 고급스러운 이미지랑 브랜드 충성도가 올라간다는 거고요. 그래야지만 돈을 못 내고 못 사는 유저들이 그 차를 부러워하는 거기 때문에 충분히 효과를 얻었다고 이야기해서 그냥 돈은 저희가 다 가졌습니다.
But of course, we told them no, and the reason for that is because because we were selling these items for pay instead of free, that sort of upgrades and it maintains this image of BMW as something that's worthy of actually paying money for as opposed to other free cars, and therefore that lends in itself value to the brand, and so ultimately we kept the money.
이런 걸 그냥 단순한 이벤트성 마케팅으로 이런 뭐 무료로 이런 걸 막 넣어주고 하는 거는 어디선 시도를 할 수가 있는데 제가 보기에는 어느 정도 완성을 하려면 이렇게 돈을 받고 팔아야지만 진정으로 완성이 되는 비즈니스 모델이라고 생각합니다.
So of course we can try to introduce these items and have the users acquire these, but ultimately we need to have the users acquire them for money for this business model to actually be complete in full works.
그리고 또 하나 그냥 2006년부터 적용되고 있는 모델인데요. 게임을 론칭할 때 게임을 론칭 전에 이렇게 광고가 들어갑니다.
This is another business model that was implemented around 2006 where the advertisement will play before the game starts playing.
이게 아까 거와 다른 거는 이거는 TV 광고랑 똑같이 하나의 정해진 모듈이 있기 때문에 게임을 건드리지 않고도 여러 TV 커머셜을 그대로 틀 수 있는 장점이 있습니다.
Right. This is almost parallel to a TV commercial because you don't have to touch the actual game in itself. You can just play this just like a TV commercial right before you play the game.
이 경우도 유저가 원치 않으면 이거를 패스해도 됩니다. 대신 뭐 광고를 볼 경우에는 게임의 중요한 아이템이나 저희가 게임머니를 조금 주는 걸로 타협점을 찾았습니다.
Right, of course, we also give the user the option of not viewing this commercial, but of course, if the user does view, then the user will be given certain items within the game.
아니면 뭐 이렇게 살짝 지나가는 거 보면 이게 한국에 있는 텔레콤 회사 로고가 지나갔습니다. 비행기로.
You just saw an airplane that was passing by, and there was a logo of a company as a type of in-game advertisement.
네. 이런 경우가 요즘에 있는 모바일이나 소셜 게임에서 간간히 시도가 되고 있는데 한국에서는 2000년대 초중반부터 계속 이미 적용이 돼서 안정된 모델로 자리를 잡았습니다.
So this is now recently being tried out in the mobile and the social game platform, but in Korea, in fact, this took off and sort of settled in as a normal business model around 2005.
네. 가장 중요한 거는 게임과 잘 결합시키는 게 핵심인 것 같습니다.
So I think the most important factor is understanding the game so that these efforts are in sync with the nature of the games.
네, 한국에선 뭐 진부한 얘기인데 뭐 게임들 그 e스포츠가 많이 인기가 있죠.
You guys probably know this well, but esports is very popular in Korea.
이게 뭐 한두 게임에 국한된 게 아니라 모든 게임이 나오면은 기본적으로 자기의 그 리그를 끌어가려고 하고 실제 사람들 일부의 게임 그 하드코어 게임 유저가 아니라 일반적인 인터넷 유저들이 즐기는 대중성이 있다는 게 가장 다른 점입니다.
Right, but what I want to emphasize is that it's not just one or two games that have these esport leagues, but it's a lot of games, many games that do come out to a point where now it's not just hardcore gamers who will enjoy these esports competitions, but actually just general mass. There's a general mass popularity for esports.
콘솔 게임에서는 많이 적용이 됐는데 한국에서는 특히 다른 게임은 아니고 온라인 게임을 베이스로 한 여러 애니메이션이나 그런 원소스 멀티 유스들이 적용이 되고 있습니다.
Right, and there have been many instances where there will be different efforts, business-wise, to try to use the IP of console games. That's been common, but not online games. And now it has been tested out successfully. So one source multi-use, basically using one IP for multiple uses.
그리고 이 중에서는 온라인과 오프라인을 연결하는 새로운 다양한 시도들이 있습니다. 예를 들어 미국에서 많이 하는 이런 트레이딩 카드 게임, 한국에서는 트레이딩 카드 게임만으로는 너무 매니악해서 인기가 없기 때문에 이거 온라인 트레이딩 카드 게임과 오프라인 트레이딩 게임을 같이 해서 온 오프라인 유저들이 같이 즐길 수 있는 시도를 많이 하고 있습니다.
So this is an effort where we try to merge the online and the offline component because offline, just the trading game, card games alone are not popular. So if we tried merging these two to create synergy.
유저가 이제 오프라인에서 있는 저런 카드나 이런 걸 사면 그걸 카드를 갖고 그냥 친구들끼리 노는 뿐만 아니라 온라인에 접속을 해서 온라인 유저랑도 같이 플레이를 할 수 있습니다.
So the user would be able to use offline items like that card you see over there and be able to use that within the games online. So that's like a bonus item you could use when you log into your game online.
그러니까 유저가 PC가 있을 때는 PC 게임을 하고 학교에 갔을 때는 모바일로 그걸 챙기고 친구들이랑은 카드를 쓰고 거기서 아이템을 다시 온라인에 반영시키고 이러한 모든 사이클이 구축이 되어 있습니다.
So it's a cycle of various platforms where if the user is accessing the game on the PC, and then they could be also playing it on mobile, and if they're at school, they could be playing offline through the cards, and then the item that they get from the card, they could use back into the PC platform.
그리고 게임을 잊을만 할 때 TV 보고 애니메이션, 인형을 사고 하면서 다시 게임으로 돌아오게끔도 합니다.
And when they're just about to be tired of the game, they see these commercials and are reminded of them and go back to playing them.
그리고 한국에선 특히 다른 나라보다는 게임에 이런 연예인들을 쓰는 스타 마케팅이 보편화되어 있습니다.
So it's become quite standard in Korea to use celebrities for these campaigns, advertisement campaigns.
이게 왜 중요한 의미를 갖냐면 보통 스타 마케팅은 가지고 있는 컨텐츠가 보편적인 전체 대중을 상대로 해야지만 쓸 수 있는 마케팅입니다.
And the reason this is important is because we're using the celebrities of star marketing as a way to reach out to the mass audience.
우리가 어떤 게임에 특정 게임을 해서 그 게임을 즐기는 유저들을 공략해야 된다면 이런 매스 마케팅을 할 필요가 없습니다.
If we were targeting just a specific sector of gamers, we wouldn't see a need to make these sorts of campaigns, which is designed to reach out to the mass audience.
미국도 최근 보면 콘솔 게임 중에서 상당히 대중적으로 많이 즐기는 게임에서만 스타 마케팅을 씁니다.
When you look at North America as well, you will see instances where console games will use celebrities in order to reach the mass audience.
근데 한국에서는 보다 다양하게 온라인 게임의 여러 장르에 스타 마케팅을 쓰는 걸 봤을 때 그만큼 대중적으로 게임이 인정받고 있다는 걸 알 수 있습니다.
But in Korea, you'll see that in the online games, there will be various genres that are using celebrities. So you could see how widespread, how infiltrated the online games is in the lives of just average Korean.
이건 제가 2004년에 만들었던 거네요.
I made this in 2004.
뮤직비디오를 찍기도 합니다.
A music video.
이것도 보시면 그냥 전체 게임에 대한 느낌을 전달하는 걸 위주로 하고 있고 구체적인 특정한 너무 기능이나 이런 걸 강조하진 않습니다.
As with the other advertisements, we're not trying to deliver a specific message, but we're trying to deliver a brand image, sort of an image of the game itself.
게임이 컨텐츠이기 때문에 물론 그 차별화가 되게 강한 것처럼 보이지만 한국에서는 온라인 게임이 워낙 많이 퀄리티 있는 게임들이 나오기 때문에 샴푸나 과자 같은 소비재처럼 브랜드 차이를 주는 거에 대한 비중이 점점 높아지고 있습니다.
So because game content is content, we're trying to differentiate the games that are coming out with certain different types of images.
기능이 비슷한 걸수록 브랜드를 강조하는데 온라인 게임은 게임인데도 한국에선 브랜드를 강조한다는. 보통 게임은 이 컨텐츠가 다르기 때문에 그 게임 자체를 강조를 하는 경향이 있는데 한국 같은 경우에는 벌써 이렇게 게임 자체보다는 브랜드를 강조한다는 거가 온라인 게임이 어떤 특정 컨텐츠보다는 샴푸나 과자 같은 그냥 일반 커머셜 제품처럼 컨슈머 제품처럼 됐다는 걸 의미합니다.
So that online games has become so prevalent in Korea that we don't try to distinguish the content of the games themselves, so as opposed to focusing more on the actual just the brand in itself. It's
코카콜라 같이?
Right, just like Coca-Cola. So
코카콜라 and 펩시콜라.
Okay. Or online games, you could probably draw close analogy to, for instance, everyday things like shampoo or snacks. It's become that standard.
네, 시간이 오래돼서 간단히 보고 하겠습니다. 아까 온라인 게임이 서비스라고 했는데 국가에 갈 때마다 여러분 보시는 것처럼 게임들이 많이 바뀝니다.
So to wrap it up, I want to emphasize certain factors again that I believe are important. One is that online games is just ongoing service.
네, 여기도 메이플 스토리 보면 일본에 있는 메이플 스토리는 후지산이랑 벚꽃과 일본 아이템들이 들어가고요. 중국은 당연히 여기 상하이 동방명주랑 이런 중국 배경과 아이템이 들어가고요.
So for instance, taking MapleStory's example, in Japan we have certain national traits that we try to emphasize that's appropriate for that country. For instance, in Japan we have the Fuji Mountain and the cherry blossoms. In China we have the panda.
더 중요한 거는 이런 배경과 아이템이 아니라 이벤트입니다.
But the most important things are not the maps or the items, but the events themselves.
온라인 게임을 계속 1년, 2년 넘어서 10년을 계속 하려고 하면 이 안에 생활을 한다고 느끼게 해줘야 됩니다.
If you want to carry on an online game servicing for more than 10 years, you have to make the users feel like they're living and breathing this game and they're part of this.
게임을 서비스할 때 각 나라마다 이벤트 칼렌더를 둡니다. 예를 들어 미국은 뭐 추수감사절, 땡스기빙, 뭐 쭉쭉쭉. 일본은 어떤 거, 중국은 구정, 한국은 다들 학교 학사 일정도 다 다르고요. 각 나라마다 다른 그 1년 이벤트 표를 갖고 거기에 맞게 매월마다 이벤트를 해주는 게 가장 포인트입니다.
So the point is that because these events are important to make the users feel like this is appropriate for them as opposed to the items, what we do is we localize it for different, we actually have a different event update schedule that's different for each country. For instance, in America, we have different events for Thanksgiving. For China, we have the Chinese New Year's. In Korea, we emphasize the school calendar.
네. 그리고 마지막은 모든 사람이 다 알고 있는 걸 다시 한번 강조를 하고 마무리를 하겠습니다.
And the last point is something that everyone knows already, but I'll say it just one more time.
네, 온라인 게임은 프로덕트가 아니라 서비스입니다.
Right, online games is a service, it's not a final product.
네. 또 온라인 게임에서 가장 중요한 거는 게임 퀄리티나 커뮤니티도 중요하지만 가장 중요한 게 persistent랑 continuance입니다.
Right, and also even though the game quality and community are also very important factors, perhaps the most important factor is the persistence factor, that the users continue to play the game.
이 말은 게임을 만드는 사람, 서비스하는 사람이 그 제품의 프로덕트 라이프 사이클을 목표를 잡고 그걸 관리를 해야 됩니다.
This means in order to continue this persistence, the developer will have to continually work to make this a viable service, meaning with the regular updates and whatnot.
네, 게임마다 6개월을 잡을 게임도 있고 3년을 끌고 가야 될 게임이 있기 때문에 그 라이프 사이클 목표를 정해놓고 거기에 맞게 이걸 관리해 주는 게 가장 중요하다고 생각합니다.
So I believe it's important to first set what the life cycle of this game will be, whether it be 6 months or 3 years, and then service it accordingly so that we meet this life cycle of the game.
제 말은 이게 게임이 그 기간에 끝난다는 게 아니고요. 게임은 계속 10년을 지속하지만 유저가 들어와서 게임을 하고선 떠날 때까지의 그 기간을 말하는 겁니다.
When I say life cycle, I don't mean the actual termination of the game service itself, but the time when a user will come in and leave the game. The game could continue to be serviced for 10 years and plus, but the life cycle is something that's where a user will come in and sort of stop playing, and that's sort of that period where we call life cycle.
네, 많이 들어주셔서 진심으로 감사합니다. 혹시 질문 있으시면 여기 메일로 해주시고요. 네, 오늘 너무너무 즐거웠습니다. 감사합니다.
Thank you everybody for your attention, and if you have any questions, please email me at the email address you see there.
Well, in fact, we can have questions even right now without emailing it. So, bring everyone back up. Okay, so now we'll open this up to any questions that you might have of our panelists.
I had a question about the commercialization of the PC cafes. I'm not sure exactly what you meant by the commercialization. Do you mean like the branding of the PC cafes, or what exactly does that entail?
한국에는 뭐죠? 네. 한국에는 약 2만 개의 PC 카페가 있는데요. 그 PC 카페를 조금 설명을 드리면은 작게는 한 50대, 많게는 한 200대 정도의 PC가 모여 있어서 일종의 미국으로 생각하면은 항상 램 파티를 할 수 있는 그런 인터넷 카페가 일단 그게 PC 카페입니다.
Okay, so to first explain what PC cafes are in Korea, there are over 20,000 PC cafes in Korea, and each PC cafe will have on average from 50 to about 200 PCs. So the user could, during any time, sort of have a LAN party if they wanted to.
물론 집에서 한국에는 거의 모든 가정에서도 그 브로드밴드가 깔려져 있어서 집에서 하는데 아무 문제는 없는데요. 한국의 특징은 뭐 친구들끼리 학교 끝났을 때 아니면 뭐 밤에 보통 PC 카페가 24시간 하기 때문에 뭐 술을 혼자 마셔도 되지만 바에 가서 같이 마시는 것처럼 같이 모여서 게임을 하는 그런 문화가 많이 있습니다. 아마 한국 말고 다 다른 아시아도 비슷할 겁니다.
Right. So of course, in Korea there is broadband, so you could be playing at home, but it just like it's more fun to go to a bar and drink as opposed to just drink by yourself alone. It's sort of the same concept where the more users you have right around you, the more fun it is to play.
그래서 보통은 친구들끼리 뭐 셋이 가서 인터넷으로 이제 다른 유저랑 싸울 때 이제 우리 팀이 같이 나란히 앉아서 서로 게임을 하면 재밌는 이치랑 같습니다.
So it's kind of like if you have your team sitting right next to you, it's more fun to play.
그래서 이 PC방 유료가 어떻게 됐냐면 처음에는 그런 인터넷 카페 PC방에서 게임 개발사랑 상관없이 그냥 무료로 게임을 즐기고 있었습니다.
So to begin explaining about the commercialization factor, before that took place, in PC cafes, users were just playing the games for free.
그러니까 유저가 집에서 게임을 할 때 아무런 제약이 없었던 거랑 마찬가지로 PC 카페에서도 아무런 제약이 없이 게임을 할 수 있었습니다.
So without any restrictions at home, as was the case at home when the user was playing, at PC cafes there were no particular restrictions when they were playing the games.
물론 집에서도 돈을 내고 유료로 해야 되는 게임에 대해서는 PC 카페에서도 돈을 내고 사용을 해야 됩니다.
Of course, if it's a game where you have to pay, for instance, subscribe at home, then that would be the same as in PC cafes as well.
여기에 제가 2001년 1월에 한 거는 그 당시 무료로 서비스되고 있던 포트리스 게임을 개인이 집에서 할 때는 무료로 계속 할 수 있는데 PC 카페에서 저희 게임을 가지고 돈을 벌려면은 저희한테 돈을 내도록 만들었습니다. 그 말은 PC 카페에서 저희 회사한테 돈을 내지 않을 경우에는 저희가 IP를 차단해서 그 PC 카페에서는 포트리스에 접속을 못하도록 하는 것을 의미합니다.
So what we did in 2001 January for the first time when we commercialized a PC cafe is that a user could play the game. We started out with Fortress, and user could play this game for free at home. But if they wanted to play this at a PC cafe, the user had to pay money to be able to play this.
유저가 아니라
I'm sorry, PC cafe owners.
돈을 안 내면
Right.
그 카페에서는 저희 게임 플레이가 안 되는 거죠. IP를 블록하기 때문에.
Right. A correction is not the user has to pay extra for playing it at cafes, but the PC cafe owners would have to pay. If they didn't pay, we would block off their IP so that they couldn't play Fortress at their cafes.
그러니까 PC 카페에서는 당연히 추가적인 비용이 발생을 하니까 그걸 안 내려고 데모도 하고 뭐 저 화형식도 하고 많이 했었었는데 기본적으로 저희의 생각은 유저들은 그냥 게임을 즐기는 거지만 PC 카페는 저희 게임을 서비스를 하면서 PC 카페에 오는 유저들한테 돈을 받기 때문에 B2C는 무료로 하되 B2B는 돈을 받는 게 맞다고 생각을 했습니다.
And the reason for this is so there was obviously a lot of protests on the part of the PC cafe owners when we imposed this additional fee, but we thought that this was very reasonable because users could be playing for free, but PC cafes, when they allow users to play, are actually making money off of by allowing the users to play our games. So it's okay if it's from B to C, but if it's B to B, then we thought that we could reasonably impose a charge.
그래서 그때 시작된 PC 카페 커머셜리제이션 모델이 지금은 많이 발전을 해서요. 모든 게임 회사들이 다양한 레비뉴 모델을 갖고 있습니다. 예를 들어서 넥슨이랑 계약해서 얼마 일정 금액을 내면 그 PC 카페에서는 모든 넥슨 게임을 무제한으로 할 수도 있고, 아니면 PC 카페에서 사용한 시간에 따라 돈을 내는 요금제를 내면 게임 유저들이 그 PC 카페에서 넥슨 게임을 한 시간에 따라서만 내는 그런 여러 가지 모델들이 나왔고, 넥슨뿐만 아니라 한국에는 거의 모든 게임 회사들은 그 모델을 다 하고 있어서 지금은 인더스트리 놈이 됐습니다.
Right. So it had a very turbulent start. So when they were protesting outside and they were burning voodoo dolls of YJ or Yongjae, Mr. Yongjae. But now it's become to a point where this model has become very standard, and it's evolved into different types of commercialization. So, for instance, if they're playing a Nexon game, if they were to play any Nexon game, they could be doing that for, say, a flat fee, or they could also choose a different option of, say, being prorated based on the number of hours that they play the Nexon game.
네, 근데 여기서 끝나면 좀 재미가 없고요. 조금 더 깊이 들어간 말씀을 한 번 더 드리겠습니다.
And it wouldn't be fun if I were to end it right here. There's just one more detail.
어차피 이 모델이 정착이 됐기 때문에 PC 카페들과 게임 회사는 서로 같이 살아갈 수밖에 없는 존재입니다.
Right, and because this business model has become quite settled and has become standard, PC cafes and the game companies need each other in order to survive.
그리고 게임을 즐기는 유저 입장에서도 지갑이 여러 개 있습니다.
직역을 해주세요. And on the end of the users, they have different types of purses.
무슨 말이냐면은
meaning
본인이 뭐 엘리멘터리나 미들 스쿨 스튜던트의 경우에 부모님의 허락을 받고 이렇게 쓸 수 있는 자금이 있고, 그렇지 않고 호주머니에 뭐 몇천 원 정도 있어서 자기가 쉽게 몇 달러를 쓸 수 있는 자금이 있습니다.
So taking elementary students as an example, they could have money from their parents, or they could have money on the side, a few bucks here and there.
그래서 그런 작은 돈들을 유저들이 PC방 가서 게임을 해주는 게 게임 회사로도 좋습니다.
And if the users were to use that money at PC cafes, it's also good for the game companies.
그래서 요즘의 게임 회사들은 PC 카페를 일종의 오프라인 거점으로, 거기에 새로운 게임이 나왔을 때 많은 혜택을 주면서 오프라인 마케팅 거점으로 활용을 합니다.
So
그냥 요즘에는 그래서 게임 회사들이 PC 카페를 오프라인 그 마케팅 거점으로서 사용을 합니다.
So a lot of online game companies these days actually use PC cafes as sort of to carry out offline marketing campaigns.
예를 들어서
For example,
새로운 게임이 나오면 제일 먼저 한 2주간 PC 카페에서 먼저 해볼 수 있도록 해주고,
so for instance, if a game comes out newly, they'll let the users try out the game for free for 2 weeks at the PC cafe.
그리고 특정한 날을 정해서 PC 카페에서 했을 경우에 집에서 하는 유저들보다 경험치를 더 빨리 올리도록 해주고,
And then there are also events such as if you play at PC cafes as opposed to at home, you have certain experience points that are doubled or tripled.
그리고 그 아이템 같은 경우도 집에서는 못하고 PC 카페에서만 구할 수 있는 아이템을 따로 만들어서 넣어주기도 합니다.
And then we create certain items that can only be obtained by playing at PC cafes as opposed to at home.
This is
your question.
This is a question for Mia. Mia, you mentioned the corporate executive who had the statement about happiness. I can't remember exactly what that was. Could you repeat that? Do you remember his?
It's a statement in their annual report about bringing, a share of happiness. It's Yuichi Wada is the CEO, and I mean the annual reports are full of the rhetoric of the wonderfulness of the industry. I thought it was interesting. I didn't bring it up here. Also, in the 2010 annual report, they mentioned harmony as a significant thing that they were trying to create.
Well, when you read the statement about happiness, it really reminded me of what Walt Disney said about Disneyland being the happiest place on earth. And I wondered if there was some kind of resonance there between, these different eras of entertainment, but this idea that we can literally create happiness through entertainment.
That's a great, thank you. Especially with the Kingdom Hearts promotions that they do with Disney. Yeah. It's a literalization of it.
This is a comment and a question for Mia. Mia, you were asking for some feedback on your idea of corporate cosmopolitanism, and it made perfect sense to me. Okay. I thought it was a very strong argument. And I thought it was nice to see a different kind of articulation about the localization process, actually, because it is very complex and there's a lot of marketing strategy that surrounds it. And people tend to look at localization either just in terms of translation or in terms of orientalization that goes on in the process or what's omitted or whatever, but you have a much broader articulation of what's going on in the process, so I appreciated that. My question is very small, actually. You said that Final Fantasy has never had forums really connected to the games themselves where players can interact with the development team. And I was interested in, you were talking about the negative outcry on Final Fantasy XIV and the various responses that the developers had to that outcry. Was making a new forum part of that response? Do they have a forum now for players?
No. Typically, the players for Final Fantasy XI, the dominant forum was on alakazam.com, which hosts for a lot of different MMOs, but was never as popular with the other ones, like with WoW, for example, because Blizzard runs its own forums. And with 14, there have been a few different sites. I haven't seen one gain dominance yet. But the developers did create a specific page, a Square page, where they release updates from the developers, like letters and things like that. It's not a forum specifically, but it's clear from the letters that they are reading those forums and also getting a lot of input from their community managers.
So here's a question to actually both of you. Okay. So, initially Square Enix has made these games like early Final Fantasies, which become a global phenomenon. It's become part of a global culture. I also see a lot of the animation from Studio Ghibli in Japan as these global appealing products. And I believe, both Square Enix and Nexon are both trying to create these global hits. But based on what you described, it seems like Square Enix doesn't even know what's the trick behind it, and they actually have trouble trying to figure out what to make that will be appealing to the Western audience. And I know Nexon has been distributing games across the globe for many years now. Do you have any lessons learned or tricks you can share with it? Like, what is a product that is more likely to have a global appeal?
World of Warcraft? Don't know. I think Final Fantasy has a certain global appeal. The problem is that it's the main line for Square Enix, and they just want more of those, and they couldn't do that with Dragon Quest. And I don't know.
네, 내가 정말 어려운 일입니다. It is very difficult things. So, for the past 12 years, we want to create global IP, but I think we learn a lot from our several failures. But 도와줘야겠다. 저희 지금 하는 거는 일단 여기까지는 하는 것 같아요. 게임을 가지고 각국에 서비스할 때 그 나라에 최대한 맞는 아이템, 환경, 이벤트를 넣어서 유저 익스피리언스를 각국에 맞추는 것까지는 저희가 어느 정도 성공을 한 것 같습니다.
So up to this point, I think we've pretty much done an all right job mastering localization in terms of selecting the right items, the environment, and the events that are particular for that country.
하지만
But
하지만 저희가 실패한 거는
what we have failed is
그렇게 글로벌로 전 세계적으로 좀 통할 수 있는 IP 자체를 처음에 생산할 때부터 그렇게 만드는 거는 실패한 것 같습니다.
But I think we have failed in terms of producing a global IP in the first place that could serve the needs and the wants of all the globally.
그거를 위해서 저희가 뭐 캐나다에 스튜디오를 만들어서 그냥 간단히 생각할 수 있는 거는 아트 디렉터들 그리고 스토리 작가들은 어떤 웨스턴 스타일 작가들을 만들고 그 다음에 한국에 있는 개발자나 여러 경험 있는 사람이 같이 코옥하는 시도를 많이 했었는데 그렇게 같이 개발하는 게 생각보다는 참 어려웠습니다.
So we wanted to try out in order to create a global IP. We actually set up a studio in Canada, and our idea was we hired for art directors and the story writers, the Westerners, and then for the actual development part of it, we hired the Korean developers. So we tried to merge the two together, but it wasn't very easy.
양쪽의 강점을 살리기보다는 양쪽의 단점이 나오는 결과가 나오는 경우가 많고요.
So what ended up happening a lot of times is that the strengths wouldn't really come out, but the weaknesses were emphasized more.
현실적으로 그런 걸 때 안 되는 거는 뭐 커뮤니케이션이나 문화적 차이 그런 거보다는 실제 하다 보면은 현실적인 다른 문제들이 많이 있습니다.
And it's not so much the cultural or the communication factors that impose the obstacles, but it's reality that imposes more difficulty. For instance,
예를 들어서 저희가 글로벌로 통하는 IP를 만들려면 아무래도 그런 쪽으로 좋은 인력들을 이동을 해야 되는데 현실적으로는 한국이나 중국에서 히트한 게임을 만들고 있는 사람 개발자들이 예를 들어 일주일 작업해서 여기에 아이템을 추가하면 돈을 뭐 정말 100억을 벌 수 있는데 그런 확실한 걸 하지 않고 미국이나 뭐 전 세계 같이 통하는 IP를 만들려고 하질 않습니다.
So, for instance, developers in Korea and China, if they were to develop an item for a week and they could be making $10 million, that's for them. They would prefer that as opposed to trying to create a global IP to serve the global community.
예를 들어서 지금 여기 넥슨 아메리카도 있었는데 넥슨 아메리카에 미국에 맞는 아이템을 넣는다고 해도 그런 기획자랑 사람들이 필요한데 아무래도 현재 돈을 많이 벌고 있는 시장에 집중하려는 성향들이 강합니다. 그쪽으로 잘 가지를 않고.
So, for instance, developers are sort of resistant. So, taking Nexon America as an example, it's hard to convince developers and producers to work for the market that's not as popular or successful as some of the other markets.
그래서 저희가 내린 결론은 일단 특정 지역, 뭐 미국에서 한국을 오든 한국에서 미국을 가든 뭐 중국에서 오든 이렇게 특정 지역을 거점으로 게임이 퍼지는 경우에는 유저 익스피리언스를 성실히 업그레이드해서 따라가는 정도가 현실적인 것 같고요.
So I think when it comes,
제가 전체를 말씀드릴게요. 그러니까 현실적으로는 글로벌리 통하는 IP를 만들기보다는 어디에 거점이 있을 거 아니에요. 한국이나 뭐 중국이나 미국에 그런 뭐 스튜디오들이 다른 국가로 진출할 때는 일단 뭐 오리진 IP나 이런 걸 잘 만들어 놓은 다음에 그쪽에 적용을 할 때 이벤트나 로컬라이징을 잘하는 거로 최대한 하는 게 우선은 현실적일 것 같고요.
So more realistically, I think right now it might be better instead of trying to create a global IP to take the IPs that are doing well in those individual or respective countries and then trying to do well the events in other countries. So basically localization.
그리고 궁극적으로 정말 특정 국가 아니면 글로벌하게 통하는 IP를 만들려면 현지에 있는 개발 스튜디오들이 만드는 게 맞는 것 같습니다. 그러니까 예를 들면 뭐 저희 회사 같은 경우에는 미국을 위한 게임을 만든다고 하면 미국에 있는 스튜디오가 저희가 지분으로 가지고 있더라도 중국을 위한 게임을 만든다면 중국 사람들이 물론 저희가 지분을 갖고 있고 거기가 주축이 돼서 만들고 노하우가 공용되는 게 맞는 것 같습니다.
To me, ultimately, I think the most important thing and what would work the best is, say, if we were to have a game for North America, it's probably better to hire local talent, North American talent, and develop the game there.
그리고 엄밀히 말하면 월드 오브 워크래프트 같이 지금 전 세계적으로 인기 끄는 그런 게임들 같은 경우가 글로벌 IP라기보다는 미국의 웨스턴 스타일 IP가 아시아에도 먹혔다고 보는 게 맞지 진정 글로벌한 IP는 라고 보기에는 좀 그런 것 같습니다. 그냥 미국 IP가 전 세계에 통하는 그런 느낌이라 약간 미묘하게 차이는 좀 있는 것 같습니다.
So I think, for instance, World of Warcraft, it might be a little difficult to perceive that as a global IP per se, but as opposed to more of a Western IP that has managed to do really well in the other countries.
물론 일본의 게임이 이제 미국에서도 인기 있는 것도 아직은 일본의 IP가 이제 미국에서도 경쟁 있게 통하는 거라 월드 오브 워크래프트랑 비슷한 상황이라고 생각합니다.
So, and to put the same, for another example, and lastly, just like World of Warcraft, for instance, if a Japanese IP were to do well in the West, it's also sort of the same logic. It's a Japanese IP that's not exactly a global IP, but it still manages to do well in the West.
I think we have time for one more question. Oh, there you are.
So I have a question about corporate cosmopolitanism, which I think is an interesting term because it separates the economic from other things, implying that you can retain a kind of local identity culturally or socially, but the economic side can be the side that travels, while the rest kind of stays local or stays at home, which is really interesting because, as you show in the beginning of your presentation, otaku style isn't just about games. It's about a lot of other things like hotels and like, aesthetics and, manga and anime and those kinds of things. And so I was interested in this idea of Japan as a kind of forerunner in many ways. Japan had a real estate bubble before we did. They're going through a recession before we are. In some ways, where Japan goes, the world goes, and they're very conscious of that, how they're going to deal with their senior citizens problem and so on. And so I'm thinking about the argument that Dean Chan makes about Japan and how its reliance on RPGs has kind of doomed it because of piracy. That you can't pirate an MMO because it's, as the second speaker says, it's a service. There's not, it's not possible to steal it, just as social games can't really be pirated either. So is there some way to separate the future and fortunes of the RPG, say, from Japan's corporate cosmopolitan strategy? In other words, will it make a difference if they become more economically global, if their fortunes are tied to a form which is really easy to steal?
That's a really good question. I'm trying to think of, like Western examples of RPGs that are dealing with the same thing. And BioWare comes to mind, and Dragon Age and Mass Effect. And it seems like their strategy is you still buy either the DVD or a digital download, but then the value comes through like the downloadable content that supposedly makes, adds things on, makes the game worthwhile, gives you the bonus elements or unlocks certain things. And I haven't really seen a lot of that with the Final Fantasies and the Dragon Quest. And it's something they address, they acknowledge the whole piracy problem. But I think part of what they're trying to do is to get past it is things like the mobile stuff, which you have to download digitally. But yeah, I haven't seen them really talk about that. And it's a really good question in terms of how are they going to deal with, like, especially the RPG, especially the big budget, AAA RPG like that.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to thank our panelists and our translators, so please join me.